My name is Evelyn Brooks. I'm 32 years old, and I have spent the last 7 years building a business consulting practice that has restructured failing operations for 14 mid-size companies. Identifying the gap between what an organization claims to be doing and what its actual processes reveal, and closing that gap with the specific, documented precision of someone who has learned that the truth of any system lives in its records, not its representations. I say that because what I am about to tell you is a story about records, about what gets documented and what gets hidden, and what happens when a woman who understood, 20 years before she died, that the people around her could not be trusted to protect her daughter's future, decided to do something about it, quietly, legally, and in a way that would survive her absence by decades if necessary. My mother Grace was that woman. The farmhouse was her instrument, and the county record she filed in the last week of her life was the document that destroyed my stepmother's plan on the afternoon. She thought she had won everything. Let me tell you about the day. Linda tried to hand over the keys. It was a Tuesday in September, the kind of September day that arrives in the eastern part of the county with a specific quality of light, low and golden, the light that makes old farmhouses look the way they look in photographs people keep for decades. The farmhouse had that quality of light on it when I drove up the gravel road and saw the cars in the driveway. 3 of them. A silver sedan I didn't recognize, a black SUV with a real estate agency logo on the side panel, and my father's truck parked at the angle he always parked it, slightly too close to the fence, the way he had parked it since I was 7 years old. I had been told the previous evening not to come. Linda had called me at 8:47 p.m. I know the time because I looked at my phone when I saw her name and made a note of it, because I had learned, over the 12 years of her presence in my family, that documenting the specific details of Linda's communications was a practice that paid returns I could not always anticipate. And she had said, in the specific, flat tone she used when she had already decided something and was informing rather than discussing, "Tomorrow is the closing. You don't need to be there. There's nothing for you there, Evelyn," I said. "That's my mother's house," she said. "It was your mother's house. It's been in your father's name for 20 years, and after tomorrow it will belong to someone else. I'd suggest you use the time to find somewhere else to put your energy." She hung up. I sat with my phone in my hand for a moment. Then I drove the 40 minutes to my office and spent 3 hours going through every piece of documentation I had accumulated over the previous 6 weeks. Because I am a business consultant, and I do not make decisions without documentation. And I had been accumulating documentation about the farmhouse's ownership history, with the specific, methodical attention of someone who suspects a discrepancy and is looking for the record that confirms it. I had not found it yet, but I had found something else. A handwritten note, tucked into the back of a water-stained envelope in the box of my mother's personal papers that my father had given me after the funeral. Given me without examining the contents, because David Brooks in grief was a man who wanted objects out of his sight rather than a man who processed their significance. The note was in my mother's handwriting. It said, "Evelyn, if anyone ever tells you the farm isn't yours, go to the county records office. Ask for Harold Bennett. Tell him Grace sent you." I had found the note 4 weeks earlier. I had called the county records office the following morning. Harold Bennett was not in that day, or the next, or the one after. And then, on the 4th attempt, the woman who answered the phone said, "Harold Bennett retired last year. But he left a message for a caller named Evelyn Brooks. He said to tell you. He'll be at the property on closing day. He said you'd know what that meant." I had not known on that 4th phone call exactly what it meant. I was beginning to understand it now, sitting in my car at the end of the gravel road, looking at the 3 vehicles in the driveway of my mother's farmhouse on a Tuesday in September. I parked behind my father's truck. I got out. I walked up the gravel path that my mother had walked every morning of her adult life, toward the house she had built her entire existence around, toward the closing ceremony that Linda had organized with the confident precision of a woman who believed she had covered every possibility. She had not covered Harold Bennett. She had not covered what Harold Bennett was carrying. And she had not covered the county sheriff's vehicle that I could see, now that I was closer, parked on the far side of the black SUV. Quiet, unmarked from this angle, with a man in a tan uniform standing beside it, who was not looking at the house, but was looking at the driveway with the patient, unhurried attention of someone who has arrived at a location and is waiting for the correct moment to make his presence known. If you have ever driven toward something you were told not to come to, not out of defiance, not out of drama, but because something in you understood that your presence was the one variable the other side had not accounted for, drop a comment, because that drive is its own specific experience. Not fear, not anger, the particular, grounded focus of someone moving toward the truth of a situation rather than away from the discomfort of it. I should tell you about my mother before I tell you about Linda. Grace Brooks was 51 years old when she died, which means she was 29 when I was born, and 44 when her diagnosis arrived, and 51 when the farmhouse went quiet, in a way that it has never entirely recovered from, regardless of who has been living in it since. She was a farm owner in the practical, specific sense of someone who understood land as a living system, requiring consistent attention, rather than a static asset requiring occasional maintenance. She knew the soil composition of every field on the property. She knew which fence posts needed replacement before the winter, and which could wait another season. She knew the specific, particular way the creek on the eastern boundary behaved in a wet spring versus a dry one, and she made decisions about the lower pasture based on that knowledge with the accumulated confidence of someone who had been watching the same land respond to the same variables for 20 years. She was also, I learned much later than I should have, an extremely intelligent woman who had thought very carefully about what would happen to the people she loved after she was no longer able to protect them herself. She died when I was 19. I was in my first year of university, 3 hours away, when my father called. I drove home through the night and arrived at the farmhouse at 4 a.m. and sat in the kitchen where she had made breakfast every morning of my childhood and understood, in the specific, irreversible way of someone receiving information, their body already knew, before their mind confirmed it, that the warmth that had organized my entire life had just been permanently removed from the room. I sat in that kitchen for 2 hours before my father woke up. In the months that followed, the farmhouse continued to exist the way things continue to exist, after the person who understood them is gone, present, functional in its basic operations, but missing the animating intelligence that had known what it was for. My father moved through the rooms with the specific, compressed grief of a man who does not have language for what he is feeling, and has decided that forward motions is the closest available substitute for processing. Linda arrived 14 months after my mother's death. Linda Brooks, née Carver, now Brooks by a marriage that happened 18 months after Grace died and that I was told about via a voicemail I received on a Tuesday while I was in a study group, is 54 years old, and she is a real estate agent, which is relevant to this story in ways that go beyond professional background. She has the specific honed confidence of someone who has spent 3 decades understanding property as a transactional object, something with a value, a seller, and a buyer, and who has applied that framework to every environment she has operated in, including her marriage, and including the family that marriage gave her access to. She looked at the farmhouse the way she looked at listings. She looked at me the way she looked at complications. I was 19 when she arrived, and 21 when my father married her, and I have spent the 11 years since navigating the specific, ambient experience of being an inconvenient presence in a family that had reorganized itself around someone else's preferences. Not dramatically. Linda was not cruel in the obvious, nameable ways that make a situation easy to describe to other people. She was cruel in the quieter, more durable ways that operate through omission and arrangement, and the consistent, structural communication of who belongs and who is tolerated. My mother's photographs came down from the hallway wall within 6 months of Linda's arrival. Not all at once, gradually, over several visits home from university. I would notice 1 fewer and then 2 fewer, and then by the time I graduated, the wall that had held 20 years of Grace Brooks's presence in this house held instead a collection of framed prints that Linda had selected from a home goods catalog. I did not say anything. Not because I lacked the words, because I had calculated, at 21, that saying something would cost me access to the house and cost my father a conflict he was not equipped to navigate and would change nothing about the photographs. Because Linda did not make decisions based on other people's responses to them. I filed it. I kept visiting. I watched. My father, David, is 58 years old, and he is a construction company manager, and he is, in the specific, structural sense of the word, a good man who made a bad decision and has spent 12 years compounding it through the consistent application of the same logic that produced it. The bad decision was choosing peace over accuracy in the first year of his relationship with Linda. The compounding logic was the calculation, repeated, every time a conflict arose between what Linda wanted and what was right, that the cost of disagreement was higher than the cost of compliance. He is not a villain. He is a man who loved his first wife and lost her, and found in Linda's certainty a substitute for the specific, disorienting experience of a world without grace in it, and who has spent 12 years paying the price of that substitution in ways he has not yet fully accounted for. On the evening Linda called to tell me not to come to the closing. My father did not call. He did not call the morning of the closing either. I had not expected him to. The arithmetic of his choices had been consistent for 12 years. I had stopped expecting different results from the same inputs. If you have ever watched a parent choose someone else's comfort over your rights, not once, not in a moment of weakness, but as a consistent, structural pattern that has operated for long enough to constitute a policy, drop a comment, because that specific experience produces a particular kind of grief that does not have a clean name, and that most people who have not lived it underestimate when they encounter it from the outside. I walked up the porch steps at 10:23 a.m. The front door was open. The specific autumn morning open of a farmhouse door that has been left ajar to let the September air move through. The way my mother had always left it in September, because she said the farm smelled different in September than any other month, and she did not want to miss it. She had been right about that. It did smell different. The specific, dry-sweet combination of harvested field and cooling air, and the particular, woody smell of the old porch boards that had been there since before I was born, and that my mother had repainted every 3 years with the same color. A deep barn red that she had matched from a paint chip she'd saved since her own childhood. Because consistency in the things that anchor you matters. Linda had repainted the porch 2 years ago. It was gray now, a neutral, market-friendly gray that photographed well in listing photos. I stood on the gray porch and looked through the open door into the hallway, where my mother's photographs no longer hung, and I breathed for a moment. 4 counts in, the way I breathe when I need to be precise, and then I walked inside. Linda was in the kitchen. She was standing at the counter with a folder of documents in front of her and a pen in her hand, and the specific, focused energy of a woman who is at the concluding stage of a process. She has been managing for months and is not expecting any remaining complications. She looked up when I walked in. Her expression moved through 2 registers in under 2 seconds. The first was surprise. Genuine, involuntary. The surprise of someone who had not expected this variable. The second was the specific, controlled compression of a woman who has decided that the surprise is manageable and is already calculating how to manage it. She said, "I told you not to come," I said. I know," she said. "There is nothing for you here, Evelyn. This is a legal proceeding. You have no standing," I said. "Where's my father?" she said. "David is in the living room with the buyers. He is not going to back you up on this. We have discussed it," I said. "I'm not here for backup." She looked at me with the expression she used when she had decided I was being irrational. The specific, slightly pitying expression of someone who has concluded that the person in front of them does not understand the situation they are in and that explaining it further is a courtesy rather than a requirement. She said, "The closing is in 20 minutes. The buyers are here. Their attorney is here. The title company representative is here. The deed transfers at signing, and there is nothing, legally, procedurally, or in any other sense, that you can do about it," I said. "Okay." She looked at me. I said, "I'll wait outside." I walked back through the hallway, past the wall of neutral catalog prints. past the kitchen where my mother had made breakfast every morning of my childhood. Out through the front door and onto the gray porch. I sat on the porch steps. I looked at the gravel driveway. The man in the tan uniform beside the sheriff's vehicle had not moved. But there was a second car now. A dark blue sedan, parked behind the silver one, that had not been there when I arrived. An older man was getting out of it, moving with the deliberate, unhurried pace of someone who has arrived at a location and is in no rush because the timing of what he is doing does not require rushing. He was carrying a leather briefcase. He was wearing a dark jacket over a collared shirt. He looked across the driveway and found me on the porch steps. He said, "Evelyn Brooks?" I said, "Yes." He said, "My name is Harold Bennett. Your mother sent me." Harold Bennett was 61 years old, and he moved like a man who had spent 4 decades carrying other people's most important secrets, and had developed in that time the specific, unhurried gravity of someone who understands that the weight of what he carries requires a particular kind of steadiness. He sat down beside me on the porch steps, not inside, not yet. He sat on the gray-painted porch steps of the farmhouse that my mother had built her life around. And he set his briefcase on the step below us, and he looked out at the gravel driveway and the September light on the fields beyond it, and he said nothing for approximately 30 seconds. I did not fill the silence. I have learned, in 7 years of business consulting, that the people who carry significant information deliver it better when they are not rushed toward it. Rushing someone toward a truth they have been holding for years produces a compressed, incomplete version of that truth. Patience produces the whole thing, he said. Your mother came to my office on a Tuesday, 11 years ago, 3 days before she died, I said. I didn't know she knew you, he said. She had known me for 6 years by then. We had been working on something together for most of that time. He paused. Grace was a very intelligent woman, Evelyn. I want you to understand that what she did was not impulsive. It was not something she decided in the last weeks of her illness out of fear or grief. She planned it over years. She revised it. She asked questions that most people, most adults with property and families and things to protect, never think to ask. I said, "What did she plan?" He reached down and opened the briefcase. He did not take anything out yet. He simply opened it so that the contents were visible. A manila folder, thick, with a rubber band around it, and beneath it a second folder, thinner, with a county seal visible on the top document. He said, "She planned for exactly the scenario that is currently unfolding inside that house. She planned for it by name. In the documents she signed, in her own handwriting, in a notarized statement, she prepared specifically for this purpose. She wrote, in the event that anyone, including my husband, David Brooks, attempts to transfer, sell, or otherwise dispose of the property known as the Brooks Farm, located at the address below, without the knowledge and consent of my daughter, Evelyn Grace Brooks, the following deed transfer, recorded with the county on this date, shall be presented publicly and without delay." I looked at the folder in his briefcase. He said, she recorded the deed transfer 6 years before she died. She had been planning it for at least 2 years before that, based on our conversations. The property has been legally yours, in the county record, since you were 14 years old. I was 32. The farmhouse had been mine for 18 years. While Linda painted the porch gray, and removed my mother's photographs, and signed a sales contract with buyers whose silver sedan was currently parked in the driveway. The farmhouse had been mine, in the county record. In the legal, documented, irrefutable sense of a property deed filed with a government office, and assigned a recording number, and stored in a system that exists precisely because property rights need to survive the people who establish them. I said, "She never told me," he said. "She didn't want you to carry it," she said. "And I wrote this down because I wanted to remember it exactly," she said. "I don't want Evelyn spending her childhood worrying about property. I want her to spend it being a child. The document will be there when she needs it. That's what documents are for." I looked at the fields beyond the driveway. The September light was doing what September light does on old farmland, finding the specific, particular beauty of a place that has been worked and known and cared for across enough years that the care has become part of what you see when you look at it. My mother had looked at these fields every morning of her adult life. She had looked at them, knowing for at least 8 of those years that she had protected them for me in a way that would survive her by as long as necessary. If you have ever discovered that someone loved you in a way that extended past the length of their own life, that they had thought carefully, legally, specifically about what you would need, after they were no longer able to give it to you directly, drop a comment. Because I do not have a clean word for what that feels like. It is not simple comfort. It is not simple grief. It is both of those things, organized around the specific, overwhelming fact of being known well enough that someone planned for your future with the same attention they gave to their own present. Harold Bennett had kept the secret for 11 years. I want to be precise about what that required, because I think it matters to the story, and because I had, in the weeks between finding my mother's note and sitting on this porch step, thought about it considerably. He had kept it through my father's remarriage, through Linda's arrival and her gradual assumption of authority over the household and the property, through the years of her managing the farmhouse as though it were an asset in her portfolio rather than a home in someone else's name, through whatever conversations had happened. And I did not know the details of those conversations, only that Linda had been talking to realtors for at least 4 months based on the documentation I had accumulated about the property's future. He had kept it through all of that because Grace had been specific about the conditions. She had not said, "Tell Evelyn when I die." She had not said, "Tell David when he remarries." She had said, "Tell no one until someone tries to take it. And if someone tries, do not tell Evelyn privately. Present the document publicly, in front of whoever is attempting the transfer. So the truth cannot be managed back into a private conversation afterward." My mother had understood something that I had spent 7 years learning professionally, that information delivered privately can be contested, reframed, and managed. Information delivered publicly, in front of witnesses, in its original documented form, is much harder to argue with. She had designed this moment 11 years in advance. From a county records office she had visited 3 days before she died. Harold said, "There is one more thing." I looked at him. He reached into the briefcase and produced the thinner folder, the one with the county seal visible on the top document. He opened it. Inside was a letter, handwritten on the specific, cream-colored stationery my mother had used for important correspondence. I recognized it immediately. The way you recognize things that belong to the sensory vocabulary of your childhood, before you have processed what you are seeing. He said, "She wrote this for you. She asked me to give it to you before the document was presented, not after. She said she wanted you to read it first so you would know why, and not just what." He handed me the letter. I held it for a moment without opening it. The handwriting on the envelope said, "For Evelyn." When the time comes, I opened it. My mother's handwriting was specific and recognizable, slightly forward-leaning. The letters connected in a way that suggested someone who had learned cursive properly and never entirely abandoned it. It was the handwriting of the notes she had left in my lunchbox when I was small, and the handwriting of the birthday cards she had made rather than bought, and the handwriting of the grocery lists she left on the kitchen counter that I had, as a child, sometimes taken with me when I left the house because the sight of her handwriting felt like a form of company. She had written, "Evelyn, if you are reading this, then something I hoped would not happen has happened. I am sorry for that. I am also not surprised, because I have known for several years that the people who will be around after I am gone will not all be people who understand what this farm is for. The farm is not an asset. It is not a transaction. It is the place where I learned who I was, and where I learned who you were, and where I intend for you to know, for as long as you want it, that there is a piece of ground in this world that belongs to you in the way that ground can belong to a person, not because you paid for it, but because you are part of it. Asterisk. I recorded the deed when you were 14, because 14 is old enough that I could see who you were going to be. I saw someone who was going to build things. I wanted to make sure there was always somewhere for you to build from. Asterisk. I told Harold to wait, not forever, only until someone tried to take it. I knew that if no one ever tried, the document would simply exist quietly in the county record. and you would inherit the farm in the normal way, and none of this would be necessary. But I also knew that if someone did try, you would need more than a conversation. You would need a record. Records last longer than conversations. I learned that from Harold. I love you, Evelyn. I loved you before you were born, and I have been loving you from whatever comes after this, and I will be loving you in the county record of this county for as long as that record exists. The farm is yours. It has always been yours. Asterisk. Mom, I folded the letter. I put it back in the envelope. I held the envelope in both hands and looked at the September fields and did the specific, deliberate breathing of someone who is managing something in a public adjacent space that deserves more privacy than the situation is currently offering. Harold Bennett sat beside me and said nothing. He had the specific, respectful quiet of a man who has delivered significant news many times and has learned that the correct response to watching someone receive it is stillness. After approximately 2 minutes, I said, "What happens now?" he said. "Now we wait for the closing to begin. When it does, when the documents are on the table, and the transfer is being executed, we go in. The sheriff will accompany us. I present the certified copy of the recorded deed. Sheriff Carter reads the recording information into the official record. The title company representative will be required under state law to halt the closing immediately upon presentation of a prior recorded deed. The buyers will be informed that the property is not available for sale because it has not been owned by the sellers for 18 years. I said, "Linda doesn't know." He said, "No." I said, "My father doesn't know." He said, "As far as I am aware, no one outside of this conversation, and the county records office has known since your mother filed the transfer." I said, "How did she keep it from my father for 6 years, before she died?" Harold was quiet for a moment, then. "She kept separate financial records. The property taxes on the farm were paid from a separate account she had maintained since before her marriage. An account your father did not have visibility into. The deed was recorded in your name, not hers, so there was no document in the marital property that reflected the transfer." "She was very careful," I said. "She was very careful," he said. "She was the most careful client I have ever had." The door opened behind us at 10:51 a.m. My father stepped onto the porch. He looked at me first, the specific, slightly pained expression of a man who had known I would come, despite being told not to, and who had not figured out what to do with that knowledge. Then he looked at Harold Bennett. Then at the briefcase, he said, "Who are you?" Harold stood. He said, "Harold Bennett. I was Grace's attorney." My father's expression shifted. Something in it, not recognition exactly, because I do not think he had known about Harold, but a precursor to recognition. The specific look of a man who is beginning to understand that a conversation is happening. That is larger than the conversation he thought he was walking into. He said, "Grace's attorney." Harold said, "Yes. I have been handling a matter on her behalf for the past 11 years. I am here today because the conditions she specified for disclosure have been met." My father looked at me. I said, "Dad," he said. "Evelyn, whatever you think you're doing." I said, "I'm not doing anything. I'm sitting on Mom's porch. Harold is going to explain the rest." My father looked at Harold Bennett with the expression of a man who has been certain about the architecture of his life for 12 years and is suddenly uncertain about the foundation. He said, "What conditions?" Harold said. "I think it would be best if we discuss this inside, when the closing begins." My father said, "The closing is in 8 minutes." Harold said, "I know." My father looked at me one more time. His jaw was tight in the specific way. It went tight when he was receiving information he did not want and was deciding whether to reject it or absorb it. He had been making that decision in the direction of rejection for 12 years. I watched him make it now. He said, "This is not the time, Evelyn." He went back inside. The door closed. I looked at Harold. He said, "Are you ready?" I thought about my mother in the county records office 3 days before she died, moving carefully, breathing carefully, signing documents with the specific, deliberate attention of a woman who understood that what she was doing needed to be done correctly, because she would not have another opportunity to correct it. I said, "She was ready 11 years ago. I can manage 8 minutes." Harold Bennett looked at me with the expression of a man recognizing something he has been told about and is now seeing directly for the first time. He said, "She said you would be exactly like this." I said, "Like what?" He said, "Steady." The 8 minutes passed in the specific, suspended way of time immediately preceding a significant event. Each minute its own discrete unit, neither rushing nor extending, simply existing with the full weight of what was about to happen, contained inside it. At 10:59 a.m., the title company representative came to the door and said that they were ready to begin. Harold Bennett picked up his briefcase. Sheriff Daniel Carter, who had not moved from his position beside his vehicle since I arrived, began walking toward the house. I stood up from the porch steps. I smoothed my jacket. I looked at the fields one more time. The September light on the land my mother had known for 20 years, and protected for 18, and loved for longer than either of those numbers. And I thought about a woman who had sat in a county records office 3 days before she died, and signed a document for a daughter she would not see grow up, and trusted a man she had known for 6 years to deliver it at the right moment. She had been right about Harold. She had been right about the moment. She had, apparently, been right about me. I walked through the door. The living room of my mother's farmhouse smelled like coffee and printer paper, and the specific, slightly chemical smell of documents that have been recently handled by multiple people. The smell of a transaction in progress, of a legal proceeding, organized around a table, that my mother had bought at an estate sale 23 years ago, and that still had, on its left rear leg, the small nick in the wood from the time I had knocked it with a kitchen chair, when I was 11 years old. I noticed that nick the moment I walked in. I notice it every time I am in this room, because it is the kind of detail that belongs to the specific, accumulated inventory of a childhood home. The marks and imperfections that exist below the threshold of anyone else's attention, and above the threshold of yours, permanently, because they are part of the visual grammar of a place that formed you. Linda had not noticed it in 12 years. She had not noticed it because she was not looking at the table. As the table my mother bought at an estate sale, she was looking at it as a surface on which to place closing documents. That distinction between a thing as it is known by someone who loves it and a thing as it is assessed by someone who is processing it is the distinction that organized everything about the situation I walked into at 11:02 a.m. on a Tuesday in September. There were 6 people in the living room when I entered. Linda, standing near the fireplace with her folder of documents and her pen, and the specific, contained energy of a woman at the concluding stage of a process she had been managing for months. My father, seated in the armchair near the window, Grace's armchair, the one with the slightly worn armrest, on the right side, where she had rested her hand for 20 years, with the uncomfortable, slightly unfocused expression of a man who has agreed to be present at something he is not entirely certain about, but has decided that certainty is not required. The buyers, a couple in their early 40s, the man in a sport coat, the woman in a gray blazer, seated on the sofa with the cautiously optimistic expression of people who are about to complete a significant purchase and are managing their excitement with the specific, experienced caution of adults who have been through closings before and know that things can go sideways until the moment they don't. Their attorney. A woman in her 30s, with a leather portfolio and a precise, professional manner, seated at the end of the table nearest the door, the title company representative. A man in his 50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and a stack of documents in front of him, at the head of the table, and, in the corner near the bookshelf, standing with the quiet, observational patience of someone who has assessed the room and chosen the optimal position within it. Sheriff Daniel Carter. Linda saw him first, or rather, she registered him first. I watched her eyes find him in the corner, and track back to me, and then to Harold Bennett, who had entered behind me and set his briefcase on the side table near the door, with the calm, deliberate movement of a man placing something exactly where he intends it to be. Her expression did not break. Linda's expressions do not break easily. She has spent 30 years in real estate, which is a profession that rewards the ability to maintain composure in rooms where multiple competing interests are present simultaneously, and she has developed a composure infrastructure that is genuinely formidable under ordinary conditions. These were not ordinary conditions. But she did not know that yet, she said, and her voice was controlled and flat in the way of someone choosing to treat an unexpected variable as manageable. Evelyn, I told you not to come, I said. You did, she said. And yet, I said. And yet. She looked at Harold Bennett. She said, Who is this? Harold said. Harold Bennett. I was Grace Brooks's estate attorney. I have a matter of public record to present before this closing proceeds. The title company representative looked up from his documents. The buyer's attorney looked up from her portfolio. My father, in Grace's armchair, went very still. If you have ever watched someone realize, in real time, that the situation they believed they were in control of has a dimension they did not account for, drop a comment. Because that realization has a specific, visible quality. It moves through a person's face in a particular sequence that is different from ordinary surprise and different from ordinary alarm. It is the specific, compressed expression of someone whose internal model of a situation is being revised against their will, faster than they can manage the revision. I watched that sequence move through Linda's face in approximately 4 seconds. Then her composure reasserted itself, because that is what Linda's composure does. She said, This closing has been scheduled for weeks. All documentation has been reviewed by the title company and the buyer's attorney. If you have a concern about the property, the appropriate time to raise it was during the title search process, not at the closing table. Harold said, The concern I am raising could not have been identified during a standard title search, because the document in question was recorded in a name that was not being searched. The title company representative said, What document? Harold opened the briefcase. He took out the manila folder first. He set it on the table, not dramatically, not with the performed authority of someone who has been waiting for this moment and is now extracting satisfaction from it. He set it down the way you set down something that belongs there. With the quiet, specific weight of an object that has arrived at its correct location, he said, 11 years ago, 3 days before her death, Grace Elizabeth Brooks appeared at the county records office and filed a deed transfer for the property known as the Brooks Farm. The property at this address, transferring full legal ownership to her daughter, Evelyn Grace Brooks. The transfer was recorded by the county on that date and assigned recording number 2013 CR 04471. The certified copy of that recorded deed is in this folder. He opened the folder. The document was on top. The certified copy of the county deed, with the official county seal embossed in the lower left corner, and the recording number printed in the header and my name. Evelyn Grace Brooks, in the grantee field in the specific formal typeface of a government document. He slid it across the table to the title company representative. The room was quiet in the specific way that rooms go quiet when the information that has just arrived is too significant for the ordinary social reflexes of conversation to immediately process. The title company representative picked up the document. He read it. He read it again. He said very carefully, This is a recorded deed. Harold said, Yes. He said, Recorded in 2013. Harold said, March 14, 2013. Recording number 2013, CR 04471. I have the county's certified confirmation of that recording in the second folder. The buyer's attorney had stood up. She was looking at the document over the title company representative's shoulder with the focused, rapid attention of someone running a professional assessment in real time. She said, If this recording is valid, it predates any subsequent transfer. The sellers would not have had title to convey. Linda said, That document is not legitimate. Harold said pleasantly, I encourage you to call the county records office. The recording number is printed in the header. They will confirm it. Linda said, Grace would never have done this without telling David. My father, in the armchair, said nothing. I looked at him. He was looking at the document in the title company representative's hands. His face had the specific, interior quality of a man receiving information that is restructuring something fundamental about his understanding of his own life. Not the tightening of anger, not the brightness of grief, but the specific, slower movement of comprehension arriving in a space where a different understanding had been living for a long time. He said very quietly, Harold. Harold looked at him. My father said, "She never told me." Harold said, "No, she did not." My father said, "Why?" Harold said, "She was protecting the property." She believed, and I think the events of today support that belief, that if the transfer were known, it could be contested or managed in a way that the recorded document could not be. My father looked at his hands. Linda said, "David, this is a fabrication. She is doing this to take what belongs to us." My father said, "Linda." She stopped. He said, "Let him finish." Sheriff Daniel Carter stepped forward from his corner. He moved with the specific, unhurried authority of a man whose presence in a room changes the room's dynamics without requiring him to announce that change. He was carrying a document of his own. A printed confirmation from the county records office, time-stamped that morning, confirming the existence and validity of recording number 20013, CR 04471, he said. "I have here a confirmation from the county recorder's office, pulled this morning at 8:47 a.m., confirming the recording of a deed transfer, dated March 14, 2013, from Grace Elizabeth Brooks to Evelyn Grace Brooks for the property at this address. The recording is valid and has been continuously on file since that date." He read the recording number aloud. He read my name aloud. He read the property description aloud. The legal description of the farmhouse and the fields and the creek along the eastern boundary. The 84-word description of a piece of land that my mother had known for 20 years and protected for 18. The buyers. The couple on the sofa, who had arrived with the cautiously optimistic energy of people about to complete a significant purchase, were no longer cautiously optimistic. They were conferring quietly with their attorney, who was on her phone, who was, I suspected, calling someone at her firm to confirm what she was hearing. The title company representative had set the deed document down. He had taken his reading glasses off his forehead and put them on. He said to Linda, "I cannot proceed with this closing. If this deed is valid, and the county recording number suggests it is, the sellers do not have title to convey. Proceeding would expose everyone at this table to significant legal liability." Linda said, "This is my house. David and I have been paying the taxes on this property for 12 years. Harold said, "The property taxes have been paid from a joint account in David and Linda Brooks's names for the past 12 years. Yes, that is consistent with the records. However, paying property taxes on a property does not establish ownership of that property. Ownership is established by the recorded deed. The recorded deed shows Evelyn Brooks as the owner," Linda said. "I want my attorney," Harold said. "That is your right," she said. "This will be contested." Harold opened the second folder. He said, "Grace anticipated that possibility. In addition to the deed, she prepared a notarized statement, witnessed by 2 independent witnesses, and filed with my office at the time of the deed recording, describing her intentions for the property and her reasons for the transfer. She also prepared a separate document addressing the specific scenario of a contested claim, including a description of the separate account from which property taxes were paid during her lifetime and instructions for how that account's records could be obtained to demonstrate that the financial management of the property had been structured specifically to protect the transfer." He set the notarized statement on the table. He set the instructions document beside it. He said, "Grace spent 6 years preparing for this conversation. She was very thorough." The buyers left at 11:34 a.m., not dramatically, not with visible anger or confrontation, with the specific, compressed efficiency of people who have assessed a situation, received professional advice from their attorney, and determined that the correct action is to remove themselves from it, while the legal questions are resolved. The man in the sport coat shook the title company representative's hand. The woman in the gray blazer did not look at Linda on the way out. Their attorney paused at the door. She looked at Harold Bennett. She said, "Your client planned well." Harold said, "She did." The attorney left. The title company representative packed his documents with the careful, methodical movements of a professional who has encountered an unexpected complication and is managing his response to it with the composure his role requires. He said, before he left, that he would need to file a report with his company's legal department, and that all parties should expect to hear from them within 48 hours regarding the voided closing. He said this to the room generally. He left. Linda was standing near the fireplace. She had not moved from the fireplace since Harold had opened the briefcase. She had made arguments, 4 of them, each one delivered with the specific, controlled force of a woman who has built her professional life on persuasion, and is applying every available tool of that skill to a situation that is not responding to persuasion. And each one had been addressed by Harold with the same quiet, document-supported precision. Now she was standing near the fireplace, and she was not making arguments. She was looking at the documents on the table, the certified deed copy, the notarized statement, the instructions document, the county confirmation that Sheriff Carter had read aloud, 4 documents. 11 years in the making, she said, finally, in a voice that had lost the controlled flatness it had carried since I walked in. She planned this. Grace planned this. I said, yes, she said. She knew. She knew I would. She stopped. I said she knew that the people around her could not be trusted to protect what she built. She didn't know who specifically. She just knew the protection needed to be legal rather than personal. Linda looked at me. Her face, in that moment, did something I had not seen it do before. Not the compression of managed composure. Not the calculation of someone assessing a situation for available moves. Something underneath both of those. The specific, raw expression of a person who has been caught, not in an act of obvious malice, but in the act of being exactly who they are, in a room full of documents that describe that person with the flat, irrefutable accuracy of legal records. She said, I want to speak with David. Alone, I said. Of course. I looked at my father. He was still in Grace's armchair. He had not said anything since telling Linda to let Harold finish. He had listened to every document. He had watched the buyers leave. He had watched the title company representative pack his things. He had watched Linda make 4 arguments and watched them fail, one by one against the specific, quiet permanence of what his first wife had built. 11 years ago, in a county records office, 3 days before she died. He looked old, in that moment, in a way he had not looked when I arrived. Not physically older. Older in the specific sense of someone who has just understood the full weight of a series of decisions they made years ago, and are now standing in the accumulated consequence of them. He said, Evelyn. I said, Dad. He said, I didn't know. I said, I know you didn't. He said, I should have. He stopped. His jaw worked slightly. I should have looked more carefully. At a lot of things. I said, yes. He said, I'm sorry. I looked at my father, 58 years old, in his first wife's armchair, in his first wife's house, having just watched a legal proceeding demonstrate that his first wife had understood, years before her death, that the people around her needed to be planned around rather than relied upon. I said, I know you are, Dad. I picked up my mother's letter from the side table where I had set it when I came in. I looked at Harold Bennett. He nodded once. I walked toward the door. Behind me, Linda said something to my father in the lowered, urgent voice of a woman, beginning the process of reframing a situation she has lost into a narrative she can manage going forward. I did not turn around. The door was in front of me. The September light was on the other side of it. My mother's fields were beyond that. I walked out of my mother's farmhouse at 11:47 a.m. and stood on the gray porch and breathed the September air and did not perform anything for anyone, because there was no one on the porch to perform for, and because the specific, private moment of stepping out of a room where something significant has just concluded deserves to be exactly what it is. Not a scene, not a statement, just a person standing in the aftermath of something real, and taking the time to understand what she is standing in. Harold Bennett came out 2 minutes later. He stood beside me and looked at the fields and said nothing for a moment, the way he had said nothing when he first sat beside me on these steps an hour ago. He had the gift of appropriate silence. It was, I thought, probably the most important gift a person could have in his profession. He said, there will be legal proceedings. Linda will contest. Her attorney will argue various theories: constructive fraud, undue influence on Grace at the time of the signing, procedural errors in the recording. None of them will succeed. The recording is clean. The witnesses to the notarized statement are both living and have confirmed their willingness to testify. Grace was extremely careful about the conditions under which she signed. I said. How long? He said. Months? Probably. Not years. The county record is clear. A clear county record is very difficult to argue around in property law, I said. Okay, he said. Should retain your own attorney. I can recommend several who practice property law in this county. I said. I know someone. I'll call her today. He nodded. Then, is there anything else you need from me right now? I thought about it. I said. The letter. Was there anything else she left? Beyond the letter and the documents. He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a small envelope, different from the one the letter had come in, smaller, the kind of envelope that holds a card rather than a document. He said, She left this separately. She said to give it to you after. Not before, not during, after. I took it. My name was on the front in her handwriting. I said, Thank you, Harold, he said. Thank Grace. He picked up his briefcase from the porch railing, where he had set it when he came out. He walked down the porch steps and across the gravel driveway to his dark blue sedan. He opened the door. He looked back at me once, not with any particular expression, just the direct, steady look of a man confirming that the person he came to help is standing on her own porch on her own property under her own name in the county record. Then he got in the car and drove away. Sheriff Carter came out at noon. He had stayed inside after I left. I did not know what had happened in the room after I walked out and did not need to know the details of it, because the details of that room were no longer my responsibility to manage. What happened between Linda and my father, and the remaining legal and procedural questions, was a matter for attorneys and county records, and the specific, slow machinery of property law, none of which required my presence in the living room to function. He hopped beside me on the porch. He said, Miss Brooks, I said. Sheriff Carter, he said. For what it's worth, in 22 years of doing this job, I have delivered a lot of documents. Most of them are complicated. Some of them are clean. He paused. That one was clean, I said. My mother was careful, he said. She was. He put his hat on. You'll hear from the county if there are any follow-up matters requiring your presence. I don't anticipate any. The recording speaks for itself. He walked down the steps and across the driveway to his vehicle. He drove away. The driveway was empty now except for my car and my father's truck. If you have ever stood in a place that belongs to you, legally, completely, without qualification, and felt the specific, complicated quality of that, belonging when it has arrived through loss, rather than simply through inheritance, drop a comment. Because ownership of a thing that someone loved before you is not a simple feeling. It carries the person who loved it before you. It carries the years between their love of it and yours. It carries the specific, permanent fact of their absence from it, alongside the specific, permanent fact of their having arranged for your presence in it. I stood on the gray porch. I looked at the fields. I felt all of those things simultaneously and did not try to organize them into a single, cleaner feeling because they did not want to be organized, and because my mother, I suspected, would have appreciated the complexity of what I was feeling more than she would have appreciated a simplified version of it. She was like that. My father came out at 12:17 p.m. He came out alone. Linda did not come with him. Whether she was still inside or had left through another door, I did not know and did not ask. He stood on the porch beside me with the specific, uncomfortable posture of a man who has something to say and is not sure he has the right to say it. He said, She bought this house the year before we got married. Did you know that? I said, No. He said, She saved for 6 years. Wouldn't let me contribute. Said it needed to be hers. He paused. I thought it was stubbornness. I thought she just didn't want to feel like she owed me anything. He was quiet for a moment. Now I think she understood something I didn't. I said, She understood a lot of things. He said, She understood that the people we love are not always who we think they are, that the arrangements we make need to survive the ways we might change. He looked at the fields. She understood me, better than I understood myself. I said, Yes, he said. I chose wrong Evelyn, after she died. Not just Linda, the choices I made about what I was willing to see and what I wasn't, what I was willing to protect and what I let go. His jaw tightened. I let a lot go. I looked at my father, 58 years old, on his first wife's porch, standing in the specific, accumulated weight of 12 years of choices that had each seemed individually manageable and collectively constituted a direction he could no longer entirely defend. I said, "I know, Dad," he said. "I don't expect you to." He stopped. "I know I can't ask you to forgive what I didn't do. I just want you to know that I see it finally." "I see it," I said. "Okay," he said. "Okay." He put his hand on my shoulder briefly, the specific, careful touch of a man who is not sure whether the gesture will be received, but who has decided that not offering it is worse than the uncertainty of offering it. Then he walked down the porch steps. He got in his truck. He sat there for a moment without starting it. Then he started it and drove down the gravel road and turned onto the county road and disappeared. I watched him go. Some things take longer than a single conversation. I had said that about my father the previous chapter, and I meant it then, and I mean it now. The conversation on the porch was not a resolution. It was a beginning. The specific, tentative beginning of a man who has finally looked at something he has been avoiding and is deciding what to do with what he sees, whether he would do anything. With it was not something I could determine. It was not something I needed to determine today. I sat on the porch steps at 12:30 p.m. and opened the second envelope, the small one. The card-sized one that Harold had kept in his inside jacket pocket and given me after. Not before. Not during after. Inside was not a card, it was a photograph. A photograph of me, at approximately 8 years old, standing in the front field of the farmhouse in the specific, unself-conscious posture of a child who does not know they are being photographed. Looking at something beyond the frame, one hand shading my eyes from the sun, the other hanging loose at my side. The field behind me was summer green. The farmhouse was visible in the background, its original barn-red porch visible even in the small format of the photograph. On the back, in my mother's handwriting. "This is why, Mom." I held the photograph for a long time, 8 years old, standing in her field, not looking at the camera, not performing anything, just existing in the place that was mine before I knew it was mine, before any document had been filed, before any legal mechanism had been put in place, existing in it the way a child exists in a place that is home, which is to say, completely, without analysis, with the full and unguarded presence of someone who has not yet learned that the things that feel like home sometimes need to be protected. She had photographed that. She had kept it for 11 years, in Harold Bennett's inside jacket pocket. She had known, looking at 8-year-old me standing in her field, that the field needed to be mine. Not because of property law, not because of estate planning, because of the specific, irreducible fact of a child in a place that formed her, and the specific, irreducible responsibility of a mother who understood that formation and was not willing to let it be undone by circumstances she could not fully control. This is why 2 words, 11 years in an inside jacket pocket. Everything else she had done, the 6 years of planning, the county records office visit 3 days before she died, the notarized statement, the instructions document, the letter, the separate account, Harold Bennett, was the mechanism. This photograph was the reason. I stood up at 1:15 p.m. I put the photograph in my jacket pocket, close to where Harold had carried it. I walked down the porch steps and across the gravel driveway to the gate at the property's entrance, the wooden gate that my mother had installed. The first year she owned the property, that I had opened when I arrived this morning, and that had been standing open since then. Through the arrival of the buyers and their attorney, and the title company representative, and Sheriff Carter, and Harold Bennett, through the closing that had not closed, through my father's truck pulling out, and Harold's sedan and the sheriff's vehicle, through all of it. I closed it. Not dramatically. Not with a performance of finality or triumph or any of the emotions that the moment might have invited someone, less like my mother's daughter, to perform. I simply took hold of the gate and swung it closed on its hinges and latched it with the specific functional click of a latch, doing what latches do. The property was on one side of the gate. The county road was on the other. I was on the property side. I walked back across the gravel driveway toward the farmhouse, past the spot where the silver sedan had been parked, past the spot where the buyer's attorney had stood. When she paused at the door, and told Harold his client had planned well. Past the gray porch with its market-friendly color that photographed well in listing photos. I went inside. I went to the hallway. The wall of catalog prints was in front of me. The neutral, carefully selected prints that had replaced my mother's photographs over the course of 6 visits home from university, removed one by one in the specific, gradual way of things that are changed before you have finished grieving the original. I stood in front of the wall for a moment. Then I went to the storage closet at the end of the hallway. The closet where things that are moved out of sight are put, where things that belong somewhere else, temporarily, reside, while the person who moved them decides what to do with them, permanently. My mother's photographs were in a box on the second shelf. Not all of them. Some had been disposed of in ways I would not fully reconstruct, but many of them. In a box with tissue paper between them, stacked with the specific, careful organization of someone who had not been willing to simply throw them away, but had also not been willing to put them back. I took the box down. I carried it to the kitchen table. I sat down. I took the photographs out one by one and laid them on the table in front of me. My mother at various ages, in various seasons, in various corners of the farmhouse and the fields. My mother young, before I was born, standing in the front field with the barn-red porch visible behind her. My mother with me at various ages, the specific progressive record of a childhood lived on this land, in this light, with this person. I laid them all out. Then I took the small photograph from my jacket pocket, the one Harold had carried for 11 years, and set it in the center of the table among the others. 8-year-old me, summer field. One hand shading my eyes. This is why. Lily was not there. Lily was a character from Harper's story, not this one. There was no one in the farmhouse. But me and the September light coming through the kitchen window, and the photographs of my mother spread across the table. She had bought at an estate sale, 23 years ago. I stayed at that table for 2 hours. I ate something. There was food in the refrigerator. The practical evidence of a house that had been prepared for a closing day gathering that would not be happening. I made tea in my mother's kettle, the one with the specific, slightly off-pitch whistle that I had heard every morning of my childhood, and that Linda had apparently kept because it functioned adequately, and because her inventory of the household had not extended to the emotional register of a kettle's whistle. I called my attorney at 2:30 p.m. She answered on the first ring. I explained the situation in the specific, organized way I explain professional situations. Background, current status, required action, timeline. She asked 4 questions. I answered all of them. She said she would file a protective notice with the county by end of day and would reach out to Harold Bennett's office in the morning. I said, "Thank you," she said. "Evelyn, is it resolved?" I said. "The legal part is in process. The rest is what it is," she said. "That's usually how it goes," I said. "Yes." I put the phone down. I looked at the photographs on the table. I looked at the window and the fields beyond it. The September light that was lower now, the specific, late afternoon, quality of light that finds the fence lines and the creek and the old barn and makes them look the way they look in photographs people keep for decades. My mother had looked at this light every afternoon of her adult life. She had looked at it knowing, for the last 8 of those years, that she had protected it for me, not the light. You cannot protect light, the land it fell on, the farmhouse it came through, the gate that latched with the specific, functional click of a thing, doing what it was designed to do. I had closed that gate at 1:15 p.m. It was still closed. The county record said it would remain mine for as long as I chose to hold it. My mother had made sure of that 11 years ago, 3 days before she died, in a county records office, where she had walked in with a document and walked out with a recording number and a certainty that the thing she loved most in the world, not the land, not the farmhouse, but the daughter who had stood in the front field at age 8, with one hand shading her eyes from the sun, was protected from the ways the world might try to take things from her. I sat at the kitchen table. I looked at the photographs. Outside, the September light fell on 84 acres of farmland that had been mine for 18 years without my knowing it. I knew it now. That was enough. That was, I thought, exactly what my mother had intended. Not triumph. Not revenge. not the performed satisfaction of a person who has watched a plan complete itself in public and is now collecting the emotional reward. Just this. A daughter in her mother's kitchen, in the late afternoon light, with a kettle that whistled slightly off pitch, and a table with a nick in the left rear leg and photograph spread across its surface of a woman who had loved her daughter carefully enough to protect her from a distance of 11 years, and 2 words written on the back of a photograph. This is why. I picked up the small photograph from the center of the table. I held it for a moment, then I got up and went to find a hammer and a nail. The wall in the hallway had been empty of the right things for long enough.